Drive. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about eating disorders and how it fits with the theory behind RO-DBT. So a lot of people might know that my area of interest has always been eating disorders. It's how I got into RO-DBT in the first place, in looking for effective treatments for anorexia nervosa, especially based on my DBT background. So naturally, I was attracted to RO-DBT because it is an effective treatment for anorexia nervosa, and it can be really helpful for a lot of our eating disorder clients. So when I very first did my intensive training in Scotland, I remember I got all the way through to the end of the 2 weeks, and I remember still being really confused about how to distinguish between over-control eating disorders and under-control eating disorders. Because anorexia nervosa is the prototypical over-control disorder. These clients are rigid, they're perfectionistic, and they really have a lot of those really clear biotemperamental traits. High harm avoidance, low reward sensitivity, high risk sensitivity. So these particular traits are really quite clear with our clients with anorexia nervosa. And bulimia nervosa, on the other hand, is really considered a under control disorder, and it goes very, very strongly with borderline personality disorder, which is naturally a prototypical under control disorder. So bulimia nervosa is considered an under control disorder because it is an emotion dysregulation difficulty. These clients are much more likely to have high impulsivity, high novelty seeking, as the tendency to act without thinking as opposed to overthink things like a client with anorexia. So anorexia and bulimia are considered very different disorders from this perspective. You know, anorexia is an over control disorder and bulimia is an under control disorder. But it's not that simple. And for a lot of people who've worked with eating disorders before, will understand that there isn't such a clear-cut difference. And we need to keep in mind that a lot of clients who have anorexia when they're younger then go on to develop bulimia. So they don't just suddenly switch from over control to under control. And what about binge purge anorexia? It's got both the binging purging behavior as well as the restrictive behavior and the over-control personality type. Theoretically, sometimes not so much. So how do we distinguish between an over-control eating disorder and an under-control eating disorder? What if a client is binging and purging? Is this emotional leakage? Is it the sort of behavior which is just sort of coming out as a symptom of constant over-control? Or is it an under-control behavior? So this can be really complicated, and I remember feeling really confused by this. And the answer to identifying it isn't necessarily clear, but we do need to go back to those basics. That's self-identifying as over-control. If a client self-identifies as over-control, even if they've got bulimia, then they're probably over-control. So that can be a really good way of nutting it out. Another way of nutting it out is also our biotemperament. So trying to understand a little bit about that biological temperamental area where a client is harm avoidant, whether they are risk sensitive, reward sensitive, and how they're likely to react to novel situations, how they're likely to react to threat or risk. And that being said, also understanding their emotion dysregulation. So part of their standard DBT model for eating disorders is the emotion dysregulation model of problem eating. So if a client is using food to regulate their emotions, to try and stop an escalation in emotions, and quite impulsively eating really large amounts of food in that regard, then chances are it's an under control condition. Whereas if a client is, I suppose, acting quite impulsively, but putting it off for a while, or trying to act, planning their binge. These clients are more likely to plan their binges or their problem behavior in general. So it's about understanding if this is a symptom of emotion dysregulation or if it is possibly more emotional leakage. It's easier said than done, and it may take you a while to get a clear picture. But it is about really trying to understand that behavior and also understand the other aspects about the client as well, because chances are they have a lot of other over-control tendencies or a lot of over-control traits. It's not as simple as just the eating. There's a lot of other things. I had a client once who had binge eating disorder, which you would think would be very under control because it's binge eating disorder. There's not that restriction there. However, this client was definitely, from the way I look at it, very, very over control in the way that they responded to things, the way that they came across. They're very good at disingenuine emotions. They had a very sing-song voice, but I suppose it was much more put on. Like, oh, they really struggled with their emotional relationships. They struggled with connection, and a lot of their behaviour throughout childhood and adolescence really indicated high risk sensitivity, low reward sensitivity. So again, this is something you would expect to be an under control disorder because it's a binge eating disorder. However, it was more functioning as an emotional leakage and more of a planned thing. They would plan their binges. They'd buy binge food in advance and hoard it to a certain degree so that they could do that. And they'd plan, at the start of the day when they were going to binge later on. And which really did make it quite difficult to target the behavior because at the time I was really trying to target it as a emotion dysregulation behavior, whereas, it in a lot of ways wasn't because it was so planned. So we're really wanting to understand these things much more clearly in regards to what's happening with this client, if they are over control or under control. And so that's a really important thing for us to be aware of. So obviously, if you have any other questions about this, just let me know. And all the best.